Penny Wong, thank you so much for joining the Daily Aus.
It's great to be here.
You are, of course, the Foreign Minister. There's so much that your portfolio covers. Can you start by just painting us a picture? What is your role?
That's a good question. I think the role of the Foreign Minister is to, I suppose, simply explain Australia to the world and explain the world to Australia. And in my job with people who work with me is to help manage Australia's relationship with other countries, with our region and the world, and to have an understanding of how we press for Australia's national interests. That is the things we want and who we are in the world.
I want to start with Julian Assange. This month, Australian politicians from across the aisle travelled to the US to campaign for his freedom. You've said the case has dragged on for too long. Why is it taking so long to get Assange home?
Well, the Australian government can't change the legal proceedings in another country, just as we wouldn't want or we wouldn't allow another country to change legal proceedings in our country. So ultimately, if there's a way through this, that has to be something the US government and the US Justice Department decide, and Mr. Assange has to be part of that.
Are you not pushing harder to bring Assange home because you're worried about how it could impact the US-Australia relationship?
No. And I think if things were as easy as just a discussion between politicians, then something might have happened, but they're not.
On the topic of the US, it's looking likely that the election next year will be between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. How do you think your government would work with a Trump administration?
We have a relationship between two countries, and our relationship with the United States has seen lots of different presidents, but ultimately it's a bigger relationship than any one individual.
The last time Donald Trump won power, you were in opposition. And you said at the time that Australia should essentially put less focus on its relationship with the US and focus more of its attention on Asia. Will that be your viewpoint if Trump is elected next year?
So, we have the US alliance, but I have spent most of my time since I've become Foreign Minister in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. That is our neighbourhood, that is our region. And we have to have deep, resilient relationships in our region. In a world that's increasingly more challenging and where we're all trying to deal with a whole range of really big and difficult issues.
I've heard you say that Australia is currently facing some of the most challenging strategic circumstances since the end of World War II.
Why do I say that? Yeah. No, good question. So we had the worst conflict humanity had ever seen, which was World War II. And the world came together and the world said, we never want that to happen again. So the world established the United Nations, the UN Charter, and what World War II confirmed was the US as the predominant economic and military power. And that scenario, I'm not saying it's all been plain sailing, but it's meant a lot of stability in the world since the end of World War II. Well, we face a pretty different world now. We've got competition between the US and China. We have climate change. We have the undermining of the UN Charter with the invasion of Ukraine. So we're in a world where we have to make our way in much more difficult circumstances than we have had at probably any time since the end of World War II.
By using that kind of language, how do you then reassure Australians that we're not on the brink of a really big conflict?
I don't ever try to make people frightened, but I also think in the roles that we have now to make sure we give people an understanding of the world in which we live and explain the choices we're making in that world.
But to be clear, that doesn't mean that you think we're on the brink of any conflict of that size?
I think that we always have to work to assure peace. I think every nation pretty much is saying we want peace. But we've got to work at it. Except for, Russia's at war with Ukraine, isn't it? North Korea is continuing to test in a pretty provocative manner nuclear weapons. But I think most people around the world want peace.
I want to move to China. How do you balance China being our biggest trading partner and at the same time being a threat to the security of the region?
The way I think about the China relationship is we should cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and we have to engage in our national interests because, doing no talkies doesn't really help anybody.
I've heard you say that part of your approach to China is to be calm and consistent. There is currently an Australian journalist, Chung Lei, who has been imprisoned in China for 3 years. Is being calm with how you approach those negotiations working to bring her home?
I've expressed pretty clearly to China how important Ms. Chung Lei's case is to us. Also Dr. Young, who's also being held. I've expressed publicly that Australians want to see a mother reunited with her children.
And is it working?
Well, ultimately, China, the decision is China's.
Since the invasion, Australia has given Ukraine more than $790 million in aid. What has that achieved in the conflict?
Can we start with why we're doing it? We're giving support to Ukraine because the invasion is a breach of the UN Charter, and the UN Charter says no state shall invade another. No state will compromise another's sovereignty or territorial integrity. It's in our interest to protect the international system. So if your question is, can we win the war from here? No, but what we can do is stand with Ukraine.
That's not the question. It's more with the aid, how has it helped Ukraine?
Well, we provide humanitarian assistance. We've provided military support. We've provided bushmasters. The assistance Australia has provided, as the Ukrainian ambassador has spoken to me about, has been most welcome. We don't fight the war from here, but we can stand with Ukraine in their fight.
In February, you delivered a speech in London where you spoke about Britain acknowledging its colonial past. Do you think Australia has confronted its past?
That's a good question. And I think part of what we have done over the last 20 years is taken steps to acknowledging that. I was part of a government led by Kevin Rudd who apologised to the stolen generation. I remember how hard many people fought against that. But it was an important step for us about looking into the past and recognising what had happened. So yes, this is an ongoing project. I don't think of it like you sort of cross a line, like you're running a race and you cross a finish line. I think it's a path, isn't it? It's a journey we walk together. We've got a long way to go, but we're coming a long way. And part of what we are doing with The Voice is to keep walking together.
Let's talk about The Voice. If the referendum is not successful, how do you think Australia will be perceived on the global stage?
Well, Billy, I'm campaigning to win.
And if it's not successful?
You see, look, we are not the only country that is on this journey. Lots of other countries are in the process of or are walking the same journey or similar journey with their first peoples. It's something many countries, a number of countries are doing. And I think if we are successful, I think we have a lot to gain by being more united.
The question, though, was about if it's not successful, but are you not ready to think about
I'm not ready to talk to you about that, am I?
Yes. Noted.
But don't take it personally.
I will. Now, you were at the forefront of the marriage equality campaign. We're a few weeks out from when Australia is going to vote in the referendum. How are you feeling now compared to how you felt a few weeks out from the marriage equality vote?
Look, I think this is harder in many ways.
Why?
Because people of your generation on marriage equality, the questions went from, we really need to do this, to, why haven't you people done this? I think on First Nations issues, we've got more conversations to have and more understanding to develop within our community about our history, about the experience of First Nations people and what we have to do.
If you're saying, though, that there's still so much that Australians need to learn, does that mean that you are feeling less optimistic about this referendum than you were about the marriage equality vote?
Oh, we had to learn that too. I just think that, younger Australians got there pretty fast.
And they're not this referendum?
I think they are now. I hope we win and I believe we can.
I want to end on this note. In your role as Foreign Minister, you get to see and know things about the world that we never will. I want you to picture a 12-year-old girl coming up to you and she asks you...
It's my daughter.
Well, your daughter coming up to you and asking you, is world peace ever possible? How would you answer that?
Yes, but we have to work for it.
So you do see a future where there is world peace?
I think human beings can always choose our future. I'm not one that believes that there's some sort of determined outcome, but you have to work for it. And that's what I want to do. And it's a great privilege of this job as I get the opportunity to do that.
Penny Wong, thank you so much for joining the Daily Aus. We really appreciate it.
Good to speak with you.